Where would we be without buttons? We'd be in a very zip-heavy world.
Or lever heavy.
Ugh. That is the worst.
Too many levers.
Oh, lever heavy, yes.
Where's my fulcrum? Is what everybody would be saying. Where's my fulcrum?
Come and wind the fulcrum.
Yeah.
Young snapper. All right.
Give me a lever and a fulcrum, and I could move the moon.
That's
what Newton said.
Well,
or it was Archimedes, one of those.
Yeah. When he wasn't in the bath, he was philosophizing about what to do with the fulcrum.
Yeah.
In fact, sometimes
maybe it was Pythagoras.
Yeah, even in the bath, he would
constantly bathing. One of the most clean philosophers they were.
He was.
Yeah.
It was a very dirty time back then too.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It was unusual. He was unusually clean.
Yeah. Also, dirt was more dirty.
It was.
It was some of the dirtiest dirt.
There wasn't a lot of mining going on.
No. So it was like old dirt. We hadn't had any new dirt arrive through the mining channels.
That's where the phrase, go and get some dirt on him comes from.
Yeah, it was people starting the operations of mining, and in order to throw it at people who, we weren't sure whether they deserved it, but through the process of getting that new dirt out and putting it on them, we discovered whether or not they were worthy of that new dirt and whether they could stand up to situations.
Yeah, it was more of a compliment.
Yeah.
Back then.
Get some dirt on him. New dirt.
Over time, it evolved into something more hideous.
Yeah.
All right.
About fact finding.
I'm going to get through this episode without saying all right.
I'm going to get through this without clearing my throat.
I'm going to get through this episode whether it kills me or not.
I'm going to get through this episode whilst wearing an apron.
I'm going to get through this episode most likely.
I'm going to get through this episode whilst sleeping.
I don't know if our listeners will get through this episode. All right, speaking of getting through the episode.
Let's get through the episode.
I'm going to hit the play button. Now, you're not going to be able to hear this, Jake. This is the theme song.
No.
You can't hear it. Everyone else can.
I'm going to pretend to groove along.
Yeah.
This is how I dance, guys.
That's funky.
This is how I dance.
Hello, and welcome to The Pouch, the podcast equivalent of 2020 that takes a not-so-serious look at the week in Australian news and or politics. I'm Gregg. If I never see Ham again, I'll die a very happy man, Savage.
And I'm Jake. If I hear anyone say, what's the worst that could happen about 2021 on New Year's Eve, I'm going to rage vomit. Gregg. If I wouldn't. On today's episode, we talk highlights, lowlights, spotlights, and so many more different variations on lights.
And Jake, while we're as snug as a bug in this proverbial rug, I want to know what you think is the worst that could happen in 2021. Did you have to put the fingers down the throat, or was it just a natural regurgitation?
Well, listeners might be able to tell that there's a little bit of sultry nature in my voice today.
Oh yeah.
I have the beginnings of a cold, not COVID, thankfully. I was tested on Monday, but yep, I've got the ability to gurge on command at the moment.
Excellent.
Thanks to the cold.
It's a good talent to have. All right, we're reaching the end of the intro. It's done.
Yeah.
It's done. Dun, 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 dun.
By the way, absolutely loved the idea of the podcast equivalent of 2020. That was very fun.
It was very good, Jake. You've done a wonderful job with that one.
Oh, did I do that one?
Yeah.
I thought that was...
Oh, maybe it was me. Who knows? Who knows when we do things? Welcome to the final episode of 2020 for The Pouch, the podcast. And can I say thank you to everyone who's stuck with us for this year. It is Tuesday, December the 29th. It is foggy as anything and freezing in the Blue Mountains, which I cannot fathom. If you had have grabbed me by the shirt collar. If you had what do they call it? Front shirted me. Shirt fronted me at the beginning of the year and said, tell me what you think the weather's going to be like around Christmas time and New Year's time. I definitely would not have said foggy and 19 degrees. I would have said we will all be dead.
Yeah, apocalypse. And maybe showers. Would you say, Greg, it's foggy AF?
I definitely would say it's foggy AF. Yes, absolutely.
In this context, AF stands for as fog.
As
foggy as fog.
It's foggy as fog. It is just incredible. We've had such a... What's the weather like in Brisbane? Talk me through it, Jake. What's the weather in the chopper?
It's hot AF.
It's hot as fog?
Yep. Yeah, like it's hot as fog. And no, it's really hot, really humid, and we're expecting a lot of rain over the next couple of days.
I got a news alert about your weather. That's how full on it is.
Pretty prolific weather. People in the Blue Mountains are receiving weather alerts about Queensland. It may spill over the border. Yeah, look, it's a hot day today. I stepped outside to go for a run this morning, and I turned around and decided not to go for a run this morning because it was so bloody hot.
That's good. I like the fact that you and I did the same amount of exercise this morning. That makes me feel good.
Yeah.
Righto, let's get into it, Jake. Today, talk me through a bit of the the structure of today's show. What can listeners expect from today's show?
Well, so the first thing we wanted to do is talk through, the highlights really of the podcast itself.
Absolutely.
We've been doing this for a little bit over a year now. We're so delighted about the fact that there are a bunch of people who have graciously decided to join Patreon and essentially pay for the content that we produce, which is just marvelous. So we wanted to go through a few of the things in the podcast over the last year, and then we wanted to do a little bit of sort of a look back at the year that was in state and federal politics, specifically focusing in the federal side on the leadership, on Scott Morrison and how he did and what he did. Focus a little bit on a few of the big events that he championed and chaired and oversaw, and then want to go through some of the state stuff, some of the notables within the states, some of the highlights of the year in general.
Yep.
And then sort of wanted to go through a few of the predictions.
All right.
For 2021.
Well, Jake, you mentioned the people who are really, really committed to the show. I'm sure we have people who listen, on the drive to work or something like that, and we appreciate all of those people as well. However, we do have a select few listeners who go that extra mile. Kevin Delisle, who goes the extra mile every once in a while. He became a $10 a month Patreon person this month. So thank you so much, Kevin Delisle. Now, Kevin, you have a few things coming your way. I do believe one of the things that Kevin has coming his way, because I never actually thought anyone would sign up for the $10 a month one. I'll be honest with you. So, what I put up a couple of things there for if you did sign up to be a $10 a month person. One of the things I think is actually a pouch pair of socks. So I think,
my gosh!
Yeah,
you got pouches.
We've got the pouch socks.
But you got socks are essentially pouches for your feet.
They are.
So you got pouches with the pouch on them.
Yeah, so he gets to do that, and I think he also gets to call into the show. So we are lining that up, and we'll get to do that as well, if he wants to, of course.
I'm super excited about that.
I'm very excited about that. He may just want to, just stick with what he's got, and be happy to be a $10 a month Patreon. But so thank you so much for being the first $10 a month patron. We really appreciate it, and also thank you to Sarah Shamshiri, if I've got that correct. Sarah Shamshiri. She has asked. She played Mug or Sticker, and I couldn't believe it, Jake. She won a mug and some stickers as well.
Wow, she won mug or sticker.
She did, and that has to be the final mug or sticker competition for the year. So we can't keep going with that, Jake. I've run out of mugs. I still have some stickers though. So, but we'll. So
you can play. You can call in now and play sticker or sticker.
Yeah, sticker or more stickers. Now we do have some spare stickers because Sarah said, "Don't want any stickers, thank you very much. Just want a mug." I said, "No problem at all." So whatever the listeners want, they get. So yeah, thank you to Kevin this week, and thank you to Sarah as well for going that extra mile to be fans of the show. Let's get into some highlights of the podcast itself, Jake.
Well, I think
Go.
Oh, I was going to say, look, my favourite event of the year was the time when we just commenced recording. We had just pressed the record button, and Greg, you sneezed.
Yep.
You sneezed.
Yep.
I got to say, probably one of the greatest sneezes in the history of the world, if not the history of the universe. I don't know. I can't see out there that far. But it was an absolute highlight for me. And I think, Greg, it was a bit of a highlight for people around the world.
Look, the data doesn't lie, Jake, and 4,000 odd viewers, I think 5,000 odd viewers on YouTube can't be wrong. Definitely by far the biggest, our most watched video of the year is me sneezing. It also contributes to the largest amount of keywords which lead people to our YouTube page. Is the word sneeze or sneezing or funny sneezes or bloopers or something like that. So anyway, thank you to everyone for going and checking out the sneeze video. I'll include a link to that in the description below in case you haven't seen our best video of the year. But yeah, absolutely. Our next podcast is just going to be basically us making body noises.
Yep.
Because
you won't enjoy
that's
the
what
ones
the people
that I make. That I'll tell you that.
Well, we don't know, Jake. You never know what sort of anyway.
No. I've been
consistently
told since I was a child that my body noises are undesirable.
I reckon YouTube would beg to differ. The things that
we learnt this year about the sneeze fetishists. Yeah. Let's hear it.
Yeah. All right. And now there was the other time where you and I tried not to talk about the bushfires. Yep. And we ended up having a 1 hour, very long, candid conversation about the bushfires. And we ended up turning it into its own episode.
Yes. Yeah, I think the actual episode ended up being about 5 minutes because we started saying, hey, we're not going to talk about the bushfires today.
No.
So we'll go into some of the news, and we started on the first news topic that happened to touch on the bushfires. And I think we very quickly segued into an open and honest, I think raw, emotional in many ways, conversation about the bushfires and how they must be affecting the Australian people.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's lovely. So you can go back and check that out. I'll also include a link to that. I think I literally called the episode "Two Mates Talk About the Bushfires" or something like that.
Yeah, I think you did.
So we'll put a link for that episode in the description below.
I think we also, Greg, we continued that tradition when we tried not to talk about this novel coronavirus thing in China, and ended up having a very candid conversation for about an hour on our personal COVID fears and how we thought Australia might handle it.
Yeah, it's one of the interesting things about running a podcast because sometimes you'll bring up a topic and you'll think, actually, I've thought about that and I've got a bit of something to say about this particular topic. When really you haven't sat down and thought about it, you've just been driving along and it's just sort of popped up into your head or something like that. And it's really good to sort of be able to nut those out. So, it's great to be able to have those opportunities to get through those conversations and if they're half interesting, release them to the public.
Yeah, you kind of got to go with your whims, right? Because your whims will be what you're passionate about, and that's kind of important because it comes through in your voice.
Yes,
always comes through in your voice, Greg.
I've got a fake it till you make it voice. Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah, so for me personally, having the podcast this year has done its job. We started the podcast. I guess for different reasons, I'm sure you started it for different reasons than what I did, but obviously the paths cross. For me personally, it's really been about making sure that I have an excuse to stay focused on Australian news and Australian politics. And by golly gosh, it's really done that. It's really done that for me and those around me. Steering me clear of the US politics. And gosh, that was really difficult this year.
Yeah, perfect time to steer us all clear of American
I really had to find a balance between spending time in the Australian politics and in the American politics. And also finding great excuses for crossovers as well, which I think is really important because there are plenty of crossovers. Yeah. So it's been a fantastic journey for me this year to be able to go through those motions and, reflect on whether or not I'm actually interested in politics or whether or not I'm interested in the drama of politics. And that to me has been the big question on my mind throughout the year.
Yeah, the big question on my mind was really, can I stand my own voice in my own ears long enough to produce something awesome with my pal Greg?
You only have to listen to your voice once. I have to listen to it twice.
Ah, that's true.
You
That's
know,
true. I'm
so
so
really
sorry,
that
Greg.
should be
I'm
my
so
question.
sorry. Love
Excellent.
it.
And what about
No,
you,
look, I
Jake?
think also we covered a lot of things that I think we gave appropriate treatment. You know, when I say that, we're not journalists. What I mean is, I think we presented as much of both sides of each story where it was appropriate to do so. You know, there's not two sides of the vaccine story. Vaccines work, and there's not two sides of the climate change story. Climate change is real, and it's occurring. But I think where it was appropriate, we examined all of the appropriate angles, and we looked at them ourselves, and we gave our own reactions. You know, I'm the strategy guy. I like to talk about the strategy of things, why people do things, and the motivations behind them, and what they could hope to, or what perceptions exist that might help them to achieve their goals, and perhaps what their goals are. So that was a lot of fun for me. What about you? What was sort of your personal highlights?
Yeah, I think for me, I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's challenging. We started out this year by sort of going, look, let's not be, too divisive about these topics. Let's just sort of talk about them and go through the motions without, we don't want to be yelling at the cameras. We don't want to be saying, the liberal media is out to get you and blah, 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 blah. It was nothing like that, even if that's what we really think. Yep. It wasn't about that, but it's a real challenge. It's definitely really, really difficult to not have an opinion about things while you're doing the podcast. And I think now I'm sort of okay with having an opinion about things. I think I'm okay with sort of saying what China is doing is ridiculous, that, some of the things we do with climate change isn't that great, that some of the things we do with climate change is that great. And trying to have a bit of a debate about it rather than just sort of going with the flow too much. But I'm going to have to spend some time developing those things because I'm really not confident with a lot of the topics, which is part of the reason that we do the podcast in the first place. So, I'm not a journalist. I don't have a particular degree in climate change. I don't have a particular degree in economics. And this is everything that Australian politics revolves around. So for me, it's about getting involved, and it's about developing my own opinions along the way and expressing those opinions without coming across as yelly, shouty, or anything like that.
Yeah.
So maybe once I get a bit more confidence, then I'll start shouting at the camera.
Well, in many ways, one of the things that I love the most is being reasonably apolitical. You potentially couldn't tell which side of politics either you or I are on, Greg, which to me is quite appealing. I think we're both quite fair in pretty well every single way, and approach the topics in a reasonably apolitical way, looking at them on their merit rather than from a leftist bent or a rightist bent or a centrist bent, etc. We just sort of look at the individual topics on their merit, and to me, I think that's quite refreshing, quite reassuring. And I'm going to continue to not say which side of the political spectrum, because that gives us. I think that's quite helpful in life in general, and in our chosen professions. I think it's quite useful to look at issues on the face of them rather than from a particular political ideology or another.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, and I think that it's. We could probably get a lot more views or a lot more followers if we chose a particular bent and went with that, because people would know what you're going to get. So I suppose our bent is, well, that's what you're going to get. You're going to get some discussion about it, because I know I spent a lot of time in the right-wing space listening to a lot of right-wing podcasts, particularly about Australian politics and American politics, and in the left-wing space. I think it's a lot easier to find the media opinions in the left-wing space. I do think that, not to the extreme in America, but I think in Australia we still have a little bit of, hey, if you're right wing, you're a such and such person. You don't believe in climate change. You don't do this. You're a bigot. Whatever else it is, and that the left have a bit of a moral high ground. It appears in the media and all that sort of stuff. So I think it is easier to find podcasts which don't identify as left-wing, but present left-wing views. And the weird thing is that when you're a right-wing podcaster, you have to sort of announce that you're a right-wing podcaster. You don't have to announce if you're a left-wing podcaster. I think that's almost like the sleight of hand that a lot of the podcasters and the news and things present themselves as. But anyway, that's a little bit off topic. So it's interesting to spend time in both of the spaces and then come to the podcast with those opinions and those views and see them play out in real time as well across the public.
Yeah, well said.
I think so. Thanks. Speaking of Scott Morrison, speaking of right-wing people, I
don't even think that. Well, this is an interesting topic because I don't really think that Scott Morrison has a particularly right-wing ideology that drives him. One of the things that in many ways reassures me significantly is that he's not an ideologue. He doesn't necessarily have very strong convictions in sort of large L liberal, capital C conservative, fiscal policy or in fiscal or in IR laws, industrial relations laws, or necessarily on climate change as well. In many ways he sort of writes it as he goes. He can be driven by his by his cabinet on some issues, and we've seen that occur in terms of the IR law reforms very recently. The ones that were or are likely to be scrapped from that IR discussion that we had a couple of weeks ago or a couple of days ago. He is driven by the public, by the immediacy, by the need, and by his cabinet. In many ways, that's reassuring, and it sort of takes us to our first story, which was, in the first story, can you believe that this guy is still the prime minister? Had coronavirus not occurred, we had the bushfires, and we had his reaction to the bushfires, which was to effectively go on holiday to Hawaii, not tell anybody about it, which was more the issue rather than anything else. Fronting up to the media saying, "Look, I don't hold a hose, I don't hold a shovel." And as a consequence, the federal government is not really responsible for driving this. It is the state governments. But then realizing very quickly that it's more the perception of doing stuff rather than the actuality. But of course, the federal government did do stuff. They mobilised the ADF, they mobilised the reservists, the Army Reserves, and they started mobilising aid as well. Not a lot of that aid has actually hit the ground that we can see. Certainly, a lot of commentators, a lot of journalists have been unable to find the evidence of the aid. I think it was $2 billion that was committed to bushfire recovery.
Right.
Not a lot of that stuff seems to have hit the ground. A lot of stimulus obviously occurred pretty soon after that in terms of the coronavirus stimulus, etc. But this is one of the things again that I quite like about Scott Morrison is he learned his lessons. I'm super glad that he's not the same prime minister that took us through the bushfires, because that prime minister got the heck out of Dodge, didn't necessarily act on the evidence. There was all of that. There was all of the claims from the the fire chiefs that wanted to meet with him months beforehand to let him know this is quite a crazy and unprecedented season that we're approaching. There's a bunch of things that we want you to do. He's not the same guy that rejected a meeting with those fire chiefs. He's the guy that listened to the experts, that took action, and that got us through a major crisis. What do you think?
Look, if I had to give him a scorecard, right, it's tricky to give, because obviously at the beginning of the year, it didn't look good. And I tried very hard to see the world through his eyes and tried very hard to stick up for him a little bit. And he made that very challenging to do. And I think throughout the year, he has changed. It was easy at the beginning of the year for everyone to sort of have a go at him. He was a punching bag, a verbal punching bag that was an easy target. He was basically painted, bright yellow in a field of red poppies or something, right? So to coin the phrase. So, so I think he was very easy. Little did everyone know that the largest, crisis to face mankind in 100 years was about to happen, and he would actually steer us through that really quite well.
Yeah.
At while in a lot of the Western countries, there's been arguments about overreach and about government, control, taking it too far. We haven't really had that discussion here. And I think Josh Frydenberg tried to have a crack at that. Was it Frydenberg?
There was a few. There was certainly commentators like Tony Abbott who said, what's a life worth?
Yeah.
Well, why don't we put a price on a life and then decide whether taking this unprecedented action that'll shut down our economy is actually dollar-wise worth it? Do we shut it down, or do we just let it rip?
So that's the thing, right? The thing was that we listened to the experts and we got through it. Not only did we get through it, but we are one of the most successful Western countries to get through it, freaking out over 15 coronavirus cases, as we should, as opposed to, 3,000 deaths a day in the States is something that we should be very proud of. So at the moment, he's not the punching bag that everyone wishes that he was. And in fact, it's really quite difficult. And if someone starts to sort of have a go at him and to start to say, look, he's a terrible prime minister, blah, 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 it almost sounds like almost like a little bit conspiratorial, a little bit like a conspiracy theory, or you're a bit of a nut job. Now, that's not to say that he isn't a bad prime minister. It's just to say when you're saying that at the moment, it's a real challenge because of the image that we've gotten. I agree with you that I like the fact that you have to dig deep to find out what his ideals are. And I think he's very much a man where actions speak louder than words. When you look at his actions and you look at what he's done, I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that he cares for Australia, loves Australia, and wants the best for the Australian people. I just don't, there's no doubt in my mind about that. Now, you can email me at thepouchthepodcast@gmail.com and try and change my mind on that. Usually that involves a list of things that he's done wrong or hasn't done right or whatever. And, I still don't see it. I do believe that he wants the best for the Australian people.
Yeah, and I think it's probably because I completely agree with you on that premise of, at the moment, if you're speaking ill of the Prime Minister or indeed a state premier, you better bloody hell have some evidence to back up your claims. Part of that is we really want these leaders. We really want our leaders to succeed at the moment, certainly through the pandemic. We always want them to succeed, but the other side of that's A, we want them to succeed, and B, we really need them to succeed. And that's the same on a number of issues. I probably see climate change as a long-term existential issue. I like food. I like the ability to grow it, and really like the ability for my grandchildren, for example, to be able to eat food that's grown. But we really need, for example, our Prime Minister to succeed on these issues, as we needed our Prime Minister to succeed through coronavirus. I don't at all want to take away from the state and territory premiers who, through the national cabinet, really pushed the Prime Minister and broader the federal politics and politicians to make the major, changes that were necessary in order to get us through the coronavirus. Early on, the state premiers were calling for stimulus. They were calling for programs like JobKeeper and supplements to JobSeeker to make them essentially enable people to live. Early on, the state premiers were asking for things like rental freezes and eviction freezes to ensure that people weren't going homeless and congregating together, particularly during winter that was approaching at that stage, and there was going to be a bumper flu season, etc. So we wanted to ensure that people were able to live. But invariably he did get pushed. But it's not necessarily we shouldn't necessarily be saying he was obstructionist and sitting back and wasn't going to do all of these things. Part of being a good leader is surrounding yourself with other good leaders, surrounding yourself with intelligent, important people who have the facts and the evidence on their side, and listening to them. And I think, broadly speaking, he did listen to the experts, certainly when it counted on coronavirus.
Yeah, that's right. And I think he knows that he's got a get out of jail free card at the moment. So with the Gladys Berejiklian scandals, with robo-debts, with aged care, he's got this fancy new line of, I don't agree with the premise of your question, which I've heard a lot of journalists talk about, and how they don't like that anymore, and how that's the new sort of, no comment sort of situation. It gets them to take control of the conversation, which, isn't ideal in a lot of situations. So he does have a bit of a get out of jail free card, and it will be interesting to see how the public judges whether he's using that get out of jail free card, or whether or not he's actually got a leg to stand on when he's talking about not agreeing with the premise of a question, or saying that they did what they could for aged care, or they did what they could for robo-debt, or things are happening with climate change, those sorts of things. So it'll be interesting to see how long he can ride the wave of popularity, to coin another phrase.
Yeah, I do agree, and
might actually be a phrase. The wave of popularity.
Aside from that, there's also the incumbency factor. And I do want to talk a little bit about that as we sort of go through some of our predictions into the, a little bit further on down the podcast. I do want to say, he weathered a lot of storms, and certainly his popularity and his management of the coronavirus, I think, helped him to weather a few of those, all of those storms. We had Sports Rorts, which was that $400 million program that, as we discussed many times, showed a brazen level of pork barreling. Braised pork. And of course, that saw the end of the Deputy Nationals leader. Can't remember her name.
Me neither. I'll Google it.
No. Goodness me, that's funny. I cannot remember her name.
You're in charge. You're in charge of that one, Jake.
Yeah. Bridget McKenzie, that's it. Yeah. So saw the end of her, and we are still left with questions around what level of involvement the PM's office actually had. There was that inquiry that showed a tremendous number of changes coming from the Prime Minister's office. So whether the Prime Minister's office was actually involved, whether the Prime Minister himself was involved, we don't really know, and we have those questions unanswered. We also had the robo-debt scandal.
Yes.
And notably, Scott Morrison did actually start the robo-debt, or at least the precursor to the robo-debt premise, the algorithm that essentially tallied up people's earnings and estimated them based on earnings throughout the year. And he was the social services minister when he started that program, and it has been through several hands subsequent to that. But before being canned, it was canned towards the end of the year, and it achieved a record $1.2 billion settlement of taxpayer money going back to the individuals who paid out money, as well as to compensate them for their pain and suffering that they encountered through that. And Morrison did apologise in Parliament for any hurt, loss, and sadness, frustration, etc. caused. There was, of course, also that land purchased for 10 times for $30 million, for 10 times the value in, I reckon, pretty great.
Sell them my house.
In New South Wales for a new airport, and that was purchased from a Liberal Party donor. We have questions on that. We have questions unanswered on that, and
I think that's just down the road from my house. This airport.
Yeah, that's they've always been talking about a new airport around the Blue Mountains to cater for the other side of the city.
Yeah, well, it's too quiet up here. It's too peaceful. That's right.
Yeah. Need some more noise.
Yeah,
Need
it's
some more
too
noise
peaceful.
pollution.
The skies are too beautiful.
Exactly. And you touched
There's
on
not
it.
enough tourists.
You touched on it as well. The massive failures in aged care, which was to not even talk about the failures that were encountered and known before the emergence of coronavirus. There were massive lessons that simply weren't learned in New South Wales that unfortunately meant that when coronavirus did come to Victoria via that second wave, we had the same failures essentially impacting Victorian aged care, which the federal government is responsible for. And then finally, in terms of my highlights, there were plenty of criticisms around a gas-led recovery. I still, personally, I see it as just poor strategy. It was it's such an opportunity to, we want manufacturing back in Australia. We want, and we know that manufacturing is often energy intensive. And gas isn't going to do that. Unfortunately, the evidence shows gas is not going to deliver that. It may be a great transition fuel, but it was a great opportunity to invest in renewables. Solar thermal would have been a great opportunity to invest in solar thermal plants. They're massive construction plants.
Hamsters
and they require...
on hamster wheels.
Exactly. So many hamsters. Think about the hamsters. It's those kinds of things, when coupled with batteries, that would enable energy-intensive industries to flourish and consume all the power that they need in order to deliver on their whatever it is that they're manufacturing. So a few things that I wanted to highlight with Scott Morrison. On balance, I don't believe in giving an overall scorecard. Certainly, I think giving a sort of a running scorecard, I think that's more important, because it sort of shows how leaders act and react, and I agree, he is a man of action. I think that, overall, at the end of the year, we look back, he got us through probably the most, important things in the world, that has really tested us. He got us through it, and other countries have not. Other leaders have not gotten their people through it. I'm very proud of the fact that Australia became Team Australia, and we acted together mostly.
Yeah, we have a surprising submission to authority in these situations, don't we? It's been very, it's been interesting to watch everyone just become very submissive.
Yeah.
At the same time, that submissiveness is really what got us through it. So as much as we kind of give credit to Scott Morrison, maybe the credit is that, he just managed to have a personality that not everyone hated. And so when he actually announced things, everyone listened. And it's the same maybe for our premiers at the moment too. I know in the Northern Beaches outbreak, people are listening. Some idiots aren't, but people are listening for the most part, and they're getting on top of it. So, credit to the Australian people as well. However, this idea that we are, larrikins who aren't submissive to authority, I think probably needs a little bit of, evaluation, because sometimes obviously submission to authority can be a very positive thing. So it'll be interesting to see what are the criteria for that, and how far can a government take it before people start going, all right, that's enough. Because Dan Andrews was certainly in that situation, but that's a state situation. But
yeah, but I mean the evidence shows that hard lockdown, as detrimental as it was and will be to the Victorian economy
and mental health, and
absolutely. Yeah. And that'll continue to impact them for a very long time. But invariably, they're on zero cases.
Yeah, that have been for a long time.
Zero community transmission. So
yeah, I think that's sort of my interesting thing from the year, is that submission to authority, and the idea of how far could they have taken that, because obviously in other Western countries they couldn't take it very far.
Yeah.
And when they didn't,
we don't. Masks didn't become a political issue.
No, that's right. There was so much that wasn't a political issue. There was a political issue everywhere else. And, in the UK, for example, when they didn't take it far enough, and they basically had to can Christmas. So, what did they say? Was it Christmas wasn't cancelled? It'll just be different this year. We haven't had to. Well, I suppose we did have to do that a little bit in New South Wales, but certainly, most other places had a rigid Christmas. So it was pretty fascinating to watch it unfold, and pretty fascinating to watch it unfold now in the recovery period, where countries who actually went into these hard lockdowns with citizens who listened to it are going to be faring better in a recovery thing. I'm sure someone will correct me about that, but anyway, that's the pouchthepodcast@gmail.com. That's what that's for. Do you want to move on to the states?
Let's go into some of the states and their sort of notables.
All right.
The Northern Territory.
Yes.
So Northern Territory was one of the first Australian regions with bushfires in the 1920 bushfire season. The Northern Territory this year had an election which saw the return of Chief Minister Michael Gunner, his Labor government.
Yep.
And broadly speaking, they fared pretty well out of the coronavirus pandemic. They had a total of 73 cases thus far.
Interesting.
And broadly speaking, their management of borders and their hotel quarantine program certainly seemed to help the Gunner government be re-elected.
73 cases in such a geographically poignant place. Flights in and out from there internationally, nationally, locally, all day, every day. To have 73 cases is a real testament to the management there. So
it really is, yeah. And they also had, you may recall, fairly early on when Scott Morrison announced the retrieval process for Australian citizens based overseas. The Northern Territory enabled people to stay at evacuated mining camps.
Yep.
So former mining camps and other military bases. So yeah, it was pretty cool. They managed to do a pretty great job, not just for themselves but also for the Australian people.
All right. What about the other end of the country, Jake, in Antarctica?
In Antarctica, well, pretty close to Antarctica, Tasmania. Yes, Premier Will Hodgman. He resigned on January the 20th, and he was quickly succeeded pretty well on the same day by now incumbent Peter Gutwein. So Tasmania had some serious bushfires early on the year. There's going to be a very bushfire and COVID-heavy recap, but mainly to the Mangana area, or Manjana. I don't know. So Tasmania had a reasonably large influx of COVID early on, thanks mainly to the emergence of the Ruby Princess patients,
yes,
or former customers who went out to Tasmania and attended dinners and happened to pass it pretty well through a large number of people very quickly. 234 cases for them. South Australia.
Pretty good. I'm going to do South Australia, Jake.
Oh yeah,
I'm going to break it up a little bit. You can do the other. You can do the other ones. South Australia lost almost 300,000 hectares to bushfires in the beginning of the year, which notably included the fires at Kangaroo Island. I think they had a couple of deaths as well, didn't they? There were 2 or 3 deaths there. A father and son situation is very tragic. For 1 hour on October 11th, South Australia became the first state in the world to have 100% of their electricity generated through, drumroll, hamsters.
Yeah.
Solar, they're aiming for 1 in 20 in 2021. What does that mean?
That was a joke.
They're aiming for 1 to 20?
No, 1 hour and 20 minutes.
Oh, I see. Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. This is the problem with me reading your notes, is it? They're aiming for 1 hour and 20 minutes in 2021. PM Stephen Marshall. Premier Stephen Marshall announced his plans to introduce a new road user tax. Don't we already get taxed for users? Anyway.
Yes, but this is for electric
vehicles.
Oh,
is it? Right. Okay, good on them. In Australian first, but opponents say it puts South Australia at odds with the small minority of the rest of the world.
It was.
So no one else has that tax? Why the hell would they tax electric car users? Isn't the whole point?
Well, but this is the interesting thing. So we pay for using roads, etc., through our rates. There's fuel excise taxes. They're not paying any fuel. So anyway, there's a whole bunch of things that fuel cars pay for that electric vehicles essentially dodge.
Right.
So this is about leveling the playing field, but it does sort of fly in the face of the premise that what we should be doing is promoting the use of electric vehicles because they're low emissions.
Right.
So it's not really encouraging them. And given that we don't have any car manufacturers in Australia, there's no real reason to promote one type of car over another.
All right, fair enough. Let's get on the plane now, Jake, and let's fly over the deserts of Australia to Western Australia. And the other country,
over the Samson
the other country of Western
the
Australia.
other country of Western Australia. Yeah. Look, they had an interesting year. They were best known for their very hard borders and hilarious. You may recall that interview with Premier Mark McGowan about. Yes. Oh, it was a kebab.
The kebab was
about
it was great.
Yes, the COVID restrictions in New South Wales. Essentially, the journalists were asking whether is Western Australia going to have such onerous restrictions as in New South Wales, where they recently just a guy was running out jogging and he stopped for a kebab, and that seemed to trigger Mark McGowan, which I totally get.
Very
Mark
funny.
McGowan is a runner, and what sort of a jogger goes for a jog and then stops for a bloody kebab?
Yeah.
But anyway, yes, they fared reasonably well throughout the coronavirus.
Well, again, isn't it? Like the point is, if they're the conversations that we're having, we're doing pretty well, and that was pretty early on as well.
Exactly. It was very early on. So Mark McGowan was also the lone holdout in the first in-person national cabinet late in the year, which we discussed in the show. Many might say just probably refers Perth to Canberra.
The band photo one.
Yes, the band photo, exactly. The supergroup.
Yeah, the supergroup.
As it were. But yes, we also had the destruction of the Juukan Gorge the Juukan Gorge by Rio Tinto and the subsequent apology and inquiry that occurred there. And we cannot forget the massive sum of money requested by Clive Palmer in settlement for a collapsed mining prospect that he had.
Was it 30 billion or something?
Yeah, well, 30 billion, I think it was.
Yeah, 30 billion.
Ridiculous amount.
And they said that they were going to bankrupt the
Western Australia
if they went through that. But he did deny that he was asking for that much money.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's not that he wasn't asking for that. It's that he wasn't asking for specifically that.
He's, probably 29 billion.
Exactly.
I wonder, he's dropped off the radar a little bit, hasn't he? He must just be enjoying time with his family.
Not exactly. I read yesterday. So you may recall some years ago he was. This is Clive Palmer.
Yeah.
He was promoting a couple of things. He had his Jurassic Park on Coolum.
Yeah.
That
Titanic.
Collapsed. Yeah, the Titanic too. So the Titanic too. It's scheduled for some major announcements. He said in 2021.
That's exciting.
It sunk.
What's the worst that could happen?
Yeah, exactly. So there was, of course, back to Western Australia, there was that subsequent law change in response to Clive Palmer's settlement requirement to essentially protect the Western Australian people for footing the bill for that failed mining prospect. Exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, and if they can't keep him out, they'll just shut the whole border down. That's fair enough.
Well, it worked. Yeah. It worked reasonably well. Do you want to cover Victoria?
I do want to cover Victoria. Victoria's bushfires continued all the way up until March 2020, resulting in 300 homes being destroyed and 1.5 million hectares of land burned. Victoria's forays into hotel quarantine and the subsequent COVID second wave probably don't need to be prosecuted, but it resulted in 20,361 cases. This is compared to, say, Western Australia, who had 851. Is this right? Though they've been clear for over 50 days, which is an absolute miracle and an absolute testament to the people there in Victoria. Well done, Victorians. And we had the case of Adam Somyurek being captured in a sting operation, admitting to serious allegations of branch stacking in the Labor Party. Now, Jake, talk me through what is branch stacking? I know because I listen to The Pouch, but this is for
It's when you essentially gather a bunch of people who don't necessarily know that they're joining a party and don't necessarily care in order to get yourself a voting block so that you can pass things that you want within the party.
Okay.
So essentially, you're calling all your mates and saying, "Hey, join the party. Just need you to vote on this one thing in the exact way that I need you to
you're
vote."
literally stacking the branch of the party that you are running for.
Yeah.
And was then kicked out of the party. 1,700 people had their memberships revoked in the wake of the stacking scandal. Dun, dun, dun. Victoria is also home to the birth of the COVID Karen phenomenon with the Bunnings Karen in Narrawarring. Narrawarring? Narrawarring.
Yeah. It's very exciting.
It was very exciting. I don't like the Karen thing. I don't do the Karen thing because I know a couple of Karens.
Yeah. And I know a couple of Karens as well. They're total Karens, which is to say that they're lovely. I like my friends.
Maybe that's our job for 2021 is to revamp what?
Reclaim Karens.
Reclaim Karens. Yep, that's right.
But in ACT, the little territory that it had a number of very close calls, particularly early on in the bushfires, with fires coming extremely close to their major airport and threatening the town.
Smoke was a huge thing there. I remember an elderly lady died when she got off the plane and inhaled too much smoke. Smoke was a huge issue in the ACT for a while.
It was, a lot of people hiding from, hiding from politics in general, which is very difficult in the ACT,
Capital
but
city, yes.
hiding also from the smoke. But ACT also had an election in October with the Labor Party returning to power under Andrew Barr.
Classic Barr. Hey, bringing home the goods.
Do you want to do New South Wales?
I'll do my home state of New South Wales. Is it my home state? It's where I live anyway. New South Wales started with an awful bushfire season with the destruction of almost 2,500 homes and 5.5 million hectares of land and a bulk of the 34 fatalities across the 2019-2020 bushfire season. New South Wales was also severely affected by the smoke, with a record number of people impacted with respiratory illnesses before it was cool. Early into the COVID issue, the New South Wales Health Department slipped in their responsibilities on the cruise ship docks by allowing the Ruby Princess passengers to disembark and return home to their respective states to spread COVID in the very first wave. The inquiry into the bungle found New South Wales Health culpable, Jake. They were culpable.
It did.
There was a National Party mutiny over koalas that Premier Gladys Berejiklian stared down and then managed to reunify. Now, this was when John Barilaro came to prominence when he decided that he was going to try and
scuttle the party.
Yeah, scuttled is a good word for it. He's going to shirt front the party, and then ended up going on a 4-week mental health leave.
Three-week mental health, yeah.
Yep. So dropped out a little bit, but he's still in the background there of the press conferences at the moment. So he is sneaking back into the limelight there, which is important. The spotlight, the unity. That is, the Premier was also constantly publicly condemning the state premiers for keeping their borders shut to New South Wales. Then we had the introduction into her private life with the exposure of the relationship to the allegedly corrupt former MP Daryl Maguire. And she managed to come out of that one unscathed. Then she also, Jake, which isn't mentioned here, she also didn't listen to her own state advice and didn't go into quarantine after a test. So she got herself tested.
I did see that.
And then a few minutes later went and had a bit of a meeting or a press conference or something like that when she should have been quarantining. And she admitted to that under her umbrella on several news stations when she was pressed. So, she didn't admit to it lightly, but she certainly got there in the end. And more recently, there's been a new cluster in the Northern Beaches, but we're all over that now. We all know how to deal with a cluster. We all know how to deal with that. I think the big issue for Gladys Berejiklian at the moment is that there's a couple of mayors coming out from the Northern Beaches area, or particularly the Northern Beaches mayor, saying that she hasn't done a very clear job of setting guidelines for the New South Wales or the Sydney fireworks at the moment. Very unclear about what people should and shouldn't be doing. I do believe that now they're getting to a point where they're saying, look, don't come down, and it's actually going to be illegal to be in particular areas unless you have a permit. So they are narrowing it down, and over the next couple of days, I dare say, we will see a few more rules coming into play about those Sydney fireworks, because I think it's great that they're going ahead, because I think people need a symbol of some sort for a fresh start to 2021, and I think the fireworks will symbolise that for many people, not just in New South Wales, but in the country as a whole. I know a lot of people like to watch it, but I think staying home and watching it on the television is the best way to make sure that 2021 starts off in a very different manner to 2020.
Yes, exactly.
Jake, Queensland, talk us through it. What's happening up there in this not-so-sunshine state?
Yes, well, Queensland was shortly behind Northern Territory in terms of the bushfires. It hit us quite severely. It arguably also had some of the longest running fires, with the fires in the Gold Coast hinterland, very close to where I live, and the smoke really only cleared, I think around it must have been late April. It properly started clearing. So the Gold Coast hinterland fires around Springbrook, etc., and some beautiful historic lodges up in Springbrook were destroyed, but those fires went for almost 200 days straight. It's pretty fair to say that the strong leadership of the Premier, the Chief Health Officer, and the Health Minister at the time instilled a level of trust, you might say, in the Queensland government that was sufficient to have them returned to government in a November election. So pretty tight year, you might say, with Queensland. A lot was happening, but those were sort of the highlights across the country.
All right, Jake. Well, let's go through a couple of other big things. Thank you so much for putting that together, the roundup of the states. Absolutely fantastic. And I really like the idea of dividing that up from the federal highlights to the state highlights. So really well done with your research on that one. I really appreciate that one. The other big things, if you want to go tit for tat.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, 16th of February, a fundraising concert, Firefight Australia, is held at Stadium Australia in Sydney following the 2019 to 2020 Australia bushfire season.
17th of February, General Motors announced that it's pulling its Holden brand from Australia. Big news.
It was very big news. 21st of February to the 8th of March, Australia won the 2020 ICC Women's T20 World Cup, defeating India by 85 runs.
24th of February, the head of Australia's Security Intelligence Organisation, or ASIO, Mike Burgess, said that there's rising foreign and far-right interference in Australia, and that violent Islamic fundamentalism remains ASIO's primary concern, but they did have those concerns over far-right terrorism as well.
The 3rd of March, Australian Associated Press announces it will close its doors. 3rd of March, Australia Associated Press announces it will close its Newswire service in June after 85 years in operation.
Luckily, it was resurrected, but resurrected by News Corp. So there's going to be a lot of jostling over the next little while. So 7th of April, High Court unanimously quashed Cardinal George Pell's convictions and subsequently, it substituted a verdict of acquittal. The court's summary of its judgment states that there was a, quote, a significant possibility that the innocent person has been convicted because the evidence did not establish guilt or the requisite standard of proof.
On the 19th of April, the Competition and Consumer Commission, the ACCC, is working to create a mandatory code of conduct that would require Facebook, Google, and other tech giants to pay news outlets when they use its content.
On the 6th of June, we had protests around numerous Australian cities, part of a series of George Floyd sympathy protests, you might call them, around the world with Aboriginal deaths in custody and a focus on Australia, on the Australian context, the Indigenous Australians in prison and deaths in custody.
Now, this next one, Jake, is easily forgotten. I don't know how it could have easily been forgotten, but it was easily forgotten. July, the Palace letters were released, which was a series of correspondence between the Governor-General, John Key, and the attaché to the Queen on the intention to sack the Whitlam government in 1975. Scandalous, Jake. Yep. Scandalous.
It was highly scandalous. The 2nd of September, the Australian economy falls into recession for the first time in nearly 30 years, as our country's gross domestic product falls 7% in the June quarter.
On the 19th of November, the Australian Defence Force releases the final report of the inquiry by Justice Paul Brereton into alleged war crimes during the war in Afghanistan, which is an ongoing story that you can follow on the pouch
on this very
2021.
podcast.
Dun, dun, dun.
Exactly.
Your predictions, Jake. What do you think 2021 is going to bring? I do have the New South Wales, Sydney fireworks as my backdrop. I know you can't see that, but the listeners and viewers at home can certainly see it. And it's going to be a symbol of the new year. What do you see the new year bringing, Jake?
Well, it's an overwhelming question, Greg, because there's so much hope that we have for a recovery for Australia coming out of coronavirus, and obviously overcoming coronavirus in New South Wales and in other areas. The vaccinations, that's going to be a massive thing. The World Health Organization claims that we need roughly 65 to 70% of the population to be vaccinated in order to prevent community transmission, which essentially means we have enough community immunity so that individuals who might have it will come into contact with others who are vaccinated and not be able to spread the virus, which is pretty incredible. In Australia, just as a bit of context, 12% of the population are registered as quote vaccine hesitant, which means essentially they look into things. They, generally speaking, they will ask a health professional rather than just going to Dr. Google and finding out what the anti-vaccine advocates that have paid for higher representation on Google might think about vaccines, but roughly 2% are registered as anti-vaccine individuals.
Okay.
So we have a good chance of achieving that 65 to 70%. Although most likely it won't be a mandatory vaccine.
No, which I think is a wonderful idea. I think we should definitely follow
so.
in the UK's footsteps there and the US as well, and lead by example. So get our leaders on the televisions, instilling confidence that this is all good, and hopefully some people of influence get the chance to be vaccinated as well. Publicly, I think that would be good. Certainly us, Jake, will certainly be getting vaccinated live on the pouch.
Oh, as soon as I'm able to get vaccinated,
we should definitely record it. Now, Jake, you've got a big call here. You think that someone's going to be given the boot?
Well,
just say it, Jake. Just say it.
This is also
you want another co-host. You're finally going to get rid of the picture in the background, hey?
I assure you I don't. Look, this is a big one, and a lot of commentators have been speaking about this. So I just sort of want to try and tread the middle line here.
Don't worry about it, Jake. Just launch into it.
But there's been a lot of commentary around the premise of will Anthony Albanese succeed? Will he remain the leader up to the next election? And I think that really comes down to a question of who wants to lose the next election, because the power of incumbency that Scott Morrison will have. Coupled with most likely there is going to be significant, more stimulus. We're at record low interest rates. So if there was ever a better time to provide money, stimulus in the form of money to the general population of Australia, either in terms of programs or direct stimulus money, I don't think that there has been a better time. So really the question is, does anyone else in the Labor Party think, it's not necessarily do they think they can beat Scott Morrison, because I am not certain, unless there is, major programs of failure or similar, then I dare say that Scott Morrison is going to, ride the wave of incumbency right the way into another term. So really the question is, who wants to lose, and is there going to be another challenger to Anthony Albanese? Now, in many ways, Anthony Albanese has been effective in opposition in that he helped to drive with him at the helm, the Labor Party helped to drive the Scott Morrison government to make great decisions throughout the pandemic, particularly in terms of stimulus and particularly in terms of those backstops like JobKeeper and JobSeeker.
Yeah.
So I think he did reasonably well. He also had a number of really poignant missteps. The one that jumps out to me is referring to the recession that we were in as the Morrison recession, instead of acknowledging the role of the coronavirus in us needing to shut down. I think that was a really silly and bad call. I would say, of course, the things like the IR reforms that were proposed very recently, they could be something that Albo could seize on and use to attack the government on, but invariably, the governor general, the Attorney General, Christian Porter, said very early on when those IR reforms came out, we're here to negotiate. We're here to discuss these and negotiate them. So they may not be a silver bullet as the Labor Party were hoping for. So who in the Labor cabinet, in the Labor caucus, could do it? Tanya Plibersek, she would be a great challenger to Scott Morrison. I think particularly Scott Morrison does not do so well when attacking other women. Or even when defending other women. If you recall that press conference fairly recently after the ABC Four Corners thing, there was the
interruption.
Female social service minister was asked a question specifically on her experience as a woman, and Scott Morrison jumped in to give his perspective on that particular question. To challenge the premise of the question, you might add. Look, there are others. Jim Chalmers, potentially. Chris Bowen, he thinks he's a challenger, probably not. Bill Shorten, he's tainted, mega tainted. Richard Marles, he's also tainted. Tony Burke, we'll just have to see. Jim Chalmers is probably a future leader. He's another sort of Kevin Rudd in that he's the great hope to reclaim Queensland seats.
Okay.
But that's that's down the track. So look, we'll have to see. It really, I think, is a question of who wants to be at the helm for the next loss.
Yeah.
We'll just have to see.
As much as I like the fact that my definition of leaders has changed over time. I don't need a Barack Obama type leader anymore, but I really think that if Labor's going to push the envelope here, they're going to need someone with a bit of pizzazz, a bit of, a bit of something to mobilize the youth, to mobilize.
Yeah, the cut through.
Yeah, that's right. To cut through and have a bit of airtime, to get a bit of media time. I don't think Albo does a very good job of that. I think, he's pretty well on par in terms of pizzazz and personality with Scott Morrison, right? They're both pretty bland individuals, which is maybe what the country needs at the moment. Who knows? But a combination of competence and charisma, I think, would go a long way.
Yeah. And I mean, Penny Wong, Tanya Plibersek, they would both do that job expertly. I don't think that Penny Wong actually wants the position. I've heard many commentators essentially say, she'd be great, but she doesn't want it.
Yeah, fair enough.
Tanya Plibersek would be that person, I think. As would Chris Bowen. Potentially, Chris Bowen was probably a bit tainted after the last election, but we'll just have to see.
All right, fair enough. And of course, Jake, there's also the idea of China, the idea that we're going to have to move into 2021 with a significant loss of trade with China. China is Australia's largest two-way trading partner with goods and services. In 2019, we did $252 billion worth of trade, which was an increase. I think I read about 35% or something like that, so it's pretty huge. But I think that, obviously that's going to drop a lot after this year. And it's continuing. They just stopped more. I forget what it was. Was it timber that they just stopped more of?
Yes.
Just in this last week. So they're really not letting up. They're not letting up in terms of giving any sort of sign that they're going to, start trading with us again. Yeah, in the short term, which is a real shame. So that's going to be interesting. Dan Tehan takes over as Minister. For Trade Minister, giving up his position of Education Minister. He did have an interview with Fran Kelly on December 3rd, and he was basically really talking about the Chinese students coming over, and he was saying that that there's been a bit of a drop, but there's also been an increase from that drop. So he's saying that we're also seeing strong commencements online from Chinese students. And that his hope is that everyone can understand that the mutual benefit that accrues from Australia's international education system. And he said that $40 billion worth of income for us, 250,000 jobs created, but also a world-class education that's provided to Chinese students and all other international students who come here to study. So it's not full confidence, but at the same time, he's saying, look, there is some online activity there, which is wonderful. Fran Kelly pushed him about getting in contact with the Chinese counterpart. He says that he has tried, but there's still no conversations happening there. So the bullies have really shown their true colours, and it's affecting Australians, it's affecting Australian livelihoods, and it's a real shame that that's how we're going into 2021. If I had any remote prediction, which I'm sure is incredibly wrong, so don't listen to anything, and I've said it before on the show, is that the coronavirus inquiry comes out and it says that China actually did a pretty good job of handling the situation, and everyone puts down their swords and carries on, but who knows? They've come out also and said that they really couldn't give a toss what the Australian government thinks, and that they are very patient in getting exactly what they want. And we've seen that in virtually every terrible undertaking that China has undertaken over the last few months, whether it be Hong Kong or the China Sea, all those sorts of terrible, inhumane situations that
the oppression of the Uyghurs.
Yes, the Uyghurs, and they are.
And they're very, Hong Kong citizens.
They're admirably patient and admirably brazen with their lies, and I use that term ironically, of course, and sickeningly is the literal term that I would use. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out when the outcome of the inquiry comes out. I don't know when that's expected to be, but anyway.
I broadly, I don't think China really cares, because I think they've, and I think that's not necessarily a pejorative. I think they know that they dealt with it appropriately. They know that they raised the alarm bells internationally appropriately. There was plenty of commentary throughout that things should have been done sooner or quicker, more unilaterally, or potentially more multilaterally, but invariably they got through the coronavirus, reasonably unscathed when compared to countries like the UK, the US, areas in the European Union, Africa, Middle East. It's everywhere. So that will be really interesting. I think the major thing with China is not necessarily the outcome of the coronavirus inquiry. It's more that we had the audacity to speak up against them. And, frankly, we've been doing that for a few years. We spoke out in terms of human rights abuses with the Uyghurs. We were one of the first nations to suggest that China should not do what they're doing in terms of crushing or oppressing the people of Hong Kong, particularly protesters. Protesting is a way to show, your democratic bona fides. So it's really important.
Yes, it's almost like they don't have those.
Exactly. So look, one of the things that will be most interesting, I think, is really how does Scott Morrison, how does the federal government deal with, when I say deal with, how do we diplomatically deal with China in 2021? How are we going to approach it? How are we going to attempt to smooth things over? How are we going to attempt to resume trade? All of these are the big questions that will be the most interesting questions in the world as we move into 2021.
Tim Tams and Twisties.
Yeah, Tim Tams and Vovos, I think was.
Do they have Twisties overseas, or is that an Australian thing?
I think I think they do have them overseas. I don't recall.
These and many other questions, Jake, are why we're going to continue the podcast into 2021. Look, I'm happy to leave it there, Jake. Are you happy to also leave it there?
Super happy.
All right, excellent. Again, thank you so much. Special thank you to you, Jake, for committing every single week to recording an episode of The Pouch. We didn't miss a week this year, so thank you so much for that.
Special thank you to you, Gregg, for being the guy that does everything. I mean, it's pretty massive. Like it's great. I love that. You know, we both have a role. I get to do the sort of the story research and fill out the script each week. But I'm so incredibly glad that I have someone
your weekend
who is I'm just so incredibly glad that I have someone who is so incredibly competent at the everything else that goes into doing a podcast. And listeners, do not underestimate the everything else that goes into making a podcast, because Gregg's job is massive.
Absolutely. And Jake does have a massive job on his hands as well. He also runs another podcast called iFriends, so feel free to subscribe to that one and check that one out. It does have some uploads up there. It's sort of one of those ones you can go back to and check out. Very, very interesting guests, usually. And then every now and again, I'm on there as well. But yeah, you can check out iFriends. Jake does run a podcast. He knows everything that happens behind the scenes, which is wonderful. Thank you so much to our listeners for 2021. We've had a wonderful, wonderful year. Well over 22,000 downloads in total for our first year of the podcast. So we're really, really stoked with that. We understand why people might not want to listen to us, but we also really appreciate the fact that people do want to listen to us as well. So it's fantastic. And thank you to the boys from Politics Over Coffee as well for a very special year with them, and for a very somber, emotional final episode. I did manage to catch that one, and it was very emotional towards the end there. So really, really lovely. And thank you to anyone who's jumped ship from there and come and listen to us as well. All right, Jake. We'll have a wonderful New Year's. What are your plans? I'm going to play the outro music. Hang on.
Depending on whether I still have a cold or not, I was going to join in the festivities with some friends, some neighbours, and have a few libations, and that should be good. But if I have a cold, then I will self-isolate.
Yeah,
so as not to spread. How about you? What are you up to?
We have a few people coming over, a few relatives coming over, and we're going to be having an Hawaiian-themed New Year's Eve. The reason that it's a Hawaiian-themed New Year's Eve is because that was the first thing we thought of when we were coming up with themes, and we went, you know what, we're just going to lock that in, because then it's all done. You can do drinks and outfits and music, coconuts, daiquiris,
ice daiquiris,
That's
Mai
right.
Tais. Oh yeah, I'm on board.
Yep, all those stereotypical situations. It's going to be great. We're going to level it up. Yeah, we'll definitely watch the fireworks. As I said, that symbol of a new beginning in 2021, and a fresh start. A fresh start, which I think is something that we all very much need. Lots of things to look forward to in 2021 for the Pouch the Podcast. A new format is coming up. It's not too different, but just a little more solidifying what we talk about and how we talk about it. Having a bit more structure, I guess you could say, Jake. A bit more structure, like a well-structured
Oiled
suit.
Machine.
Yes. Riding the wave of popularity into the poppy-ridden sunset.
I love it.
Yeah, excellent. That's the end of the show.
Always great to finish the show on a just a really well constructed note.
We're going to see you in 2021, listeners. Thank you so much, and enjoy the new year.